Okay, we're going to talk about lab exercise number 9, cutaneous receptors and referred pain. Looking at the objectives, we're going to look at the following things. 1, we're going to look at punctate distribution. That's going to be the distribution of the receptors for a specific nerve ending or for a specific type of sensation. Let me go back 1 second. Sensations. Sensations are what you feel, light, pressure, pain, things like that. You need to have a certain pathways. The ability to perceive sensation involves several components. First, you've got to have a stimulus. That would be the pressure, the pain, the light, the heat, the cold, something like that, which is a physical change in the environment. The second, you need a receptor. You need something in the skin or in the eye or in the gut or in the brain that is going to cause, feel that change and then send the message to the brain. It's a specialized nerve ending, a structure that responds to a specific type of stimulus. And then it converts the stimulus into a nerve impulse, which you need a neural pathway to take it to the brain. And the brain is the last thing. You need an interpretation center that tells you exactly what's coming in and what's happening. Sensations are interpreted. Yes, the damage, if you get a poke in the finger, the damage is at the finger, but the actual interpretation of it takes place in the brain, and then that interpretation or pain is projected back to wherever that finger is hurt, the pinprick, whatever. So, we're going to look at punctate distribution. That in the lab, when you put the stamp on your hand and you check for different types of receptors, that's punctate distribution. The receptor, the area is not just one big receptor. They have many receptors and many different types of receptors, and they're distributed differently. In areas where you would need high sensation, like the fingertips, you would have a lot more receptors, and we'll get into that. And an area that you don't need a lot of touch, the receptors will be very less common. Okay, we'll talk about modality. The receptors are different, meaning that you may have a receptor that for heat and a receptor for pain, and they're different receptors. The receptor for heat will only send an impulse with heat. And if it sends an impulse with heat, that's all you feel. If for some reason you can get that receptor to fire, it's still only going to send the impulse for heat. That's part of the law of specific nerve energies. The same with the receptor for pain or light. Light is kind of classic because anybody that's played football and gotten their bells rung or got hit or slapped so hard they saw stars, what's happened is the trauma has caused the receptor for light in the eyes to fire, but since that receptor is for light, and when it fires, all you see is light. So it could be a dark room and you get slapped and those receptors fire, but in your brain you see light. That's where seeing stars comes from. So the modality is the type of sensation that the receptor will respond to and send a message along the neural pathway to the brain. Projection, as we talked on earlier, the brain interprets what's coming in from the receptor and then projects that back to the area of the receptor. If you've stubbed your toe, the pain is going to go to the brain's going to project that back to the toe, so you know where the damage is, you know where the problem is. Phantom pain. People that have had a limb amputated many times will still feel that limb, or will feel a problem, either pain or itching in that limb, and they believe that maybe the nerves in the stump have formed kind of a neuroma, and it's still sending signals that seem like that limb's here. and that's what's called phantom pain. It's not at all uncommon in people that have lost a limb. So, going on, you're going to need to look at sensory adaptation, and there's two types of receptors we're looking at, a phasic receptor and a tonic receptor. A phasic receptor adapts over time. If you walk into a room and there's an odor, maybe somebody's cooking bacon, or, wake up and smell the coffee. You walk into a room, you always say, oh, boy, that coffee smells good. After you've been in that room for a few minutes, you don't smell the coffee anymore. That's because, yes, your phasic receptors were activated when you walked into the room and you got this whole new smell of coffee, but over time they adapt and eventually stop firing. So after a while you don't smell the coffee anymore. That you can do that with heat. Another classic example is when you put clothes on. You feel them, and then it goes away. And if you wear wool or an itchy, rough wool, that's what happens there also. Now that differs from a tonic receptor, which does not adapt or adapts very slowly. The tonic receptors, the pain type receptors, it's a survival technique. If you've hurt your knee or if you've cut your foot, if you've got a bad injury, you don't want that pain to go away because you may continue injuring that limb or that area. So you want that pain to continually tell you that injury is there so that you can do something about it. Now the amount of pain that you feel is due to the frequency. It's not a bigger nerve ending. What happens is the nerves are firing a lot faster, or more of them are firing and firing faster. So you'll see a frequency of impulses, and that's how the body gauges the amount of something like pain. 2-point threshold. Let's see if we can go on here. As I said, your receptors in the field on the skin are distributed differently. It's not one big receptor. What we did in this lab is we looked at a 2-point threshold, and that's where we use the calipers to touch various parts of the body with the 2 points of the calipers and then narrow it down until you could only feel one sensation. So where you need a lot more sensitivity, that 2-point threshold is going to be much smaller. In an area that you don't need the sensitivity, that 2-point threshold is going to be a lot larger. For instance, here you look at the first finger right at the bottom there. The 2-point threshold for that is about 2 millimeters. On the big toe, it's about 10 millimeters. So when you move that caliper down to below 10 millimeters on the big toe, that still feels as if only 1 point is touching you. However, you would have to get it down below 2 millimeters on the first finger to get that same 1 point feeling. Conversely, you look at the upper arm or the thigh or the back, those are at 40 millimeters, 40 to 50 millimeters. So you don't need a lot of sensation or differentiation there. So, there's not nearly as many sensors. Okay, now we're going to talk about referred pain. Actually, let's go back. We're going to talk about lateral inhibition here. Lateral inhibition, when the sensors are touched by a blunt object, you don't feel just a fuzzy. You still feel a defined edge to it. That is because as some sensors are firing, they will inhibit other sensors around. It's called lateral inhibition, and that's used, like as you see in the figure 10.6, a blunt object. The stimulation is much larger, but the sensation is much more defined. Okay, we're going to stop that. We're going to talk about referred pain. Referred pain is a visceral pain that is referred to the surface, some part of the surface. The classic referred pain is a heart attack. It's a visceral pain. It's damage to the heart muscle. And what we feel, especially in the males, is pain in the jaw, pain in the left shoulder, radiating down the left arm, along with some chest pain, depending on the extent of the damage. What's happened is on the neural pathways, sometimes the pain, the sensation and the pain synapse in an area in a bundle that carries other nerves that would refer this pain to the surface. So you don't necessarily feel the pain where the damage is. Now this is obviously important in diagnosis, because somebody that comes in with left shoulder pain radiating down the left arm, the doctor's not going to give him ibuprofen for a pulled muscle. He's going to start looking for a heart attack. And it's very classic in that manner. Now the other thing that we're going to look at here is the law of specific nerve energies, and we touched on it earlier. The law of specific nerve energies states that the receptor, or the modality of that receptor, is what it sends to the brain or the interpretation center. If I can get a receptor for heat to fire and send it, it's going to send to the brain the sensation of heat. Now if I have put dry ice on that receptor and damaged it enough through the very cold, the minus 78 degree dry ice, it's going to fire, but what you're going to feel is heat. It's going to feel like a burn. The other example that I'd given you earlier is if you're in a dark room and you got slapped or hit your head real hard, you're going to see stars. There's no light in that room to fire those receptors. What's happened is the trauma from the slap has caused those receptors to fire, and they are only able to fire the sensation of light. That's why you can be in a dark room, get slapped, and still see stars. That is the law of specific nerve energies. Now, other receptors will eventually shoot fire for pain in that, but that would be only after they've fired their initial modality. I think that's just about all we have in Chapter 9. And